Hi everyone, Jamie Humphries here for Six String Alliance, and today we're going to be taking a look at my live setup. Yes, we're going to be talking about guitars, amps, and the rig of doom, so stay tuned. So before we get into today's video, just a little bit of an apology, really. Apologies that there hasn't been any content for the last couple of weeks. I got a little bit burnt out, if I'm honest with you. I had a lot of studio work on. I've been learning a hell of a lot of songs to go out and play a little tour. Although it's only a short tour, there's a hell of a lot of material, and they're pretty big gigs, and they're with an orchestra as well. So there's quite a lot of pressure with arrangements and scores and stuff to get through, plus setting up my gear in terms of getting sounds programmed, getting everything ready. And yeah, I needed to just step back a little bit from YouTube. Otherwise, I just couldn't deal with having to do more stuff. So that's all kind of ready to go now. And next week I start rehearsals, so I've got some time in the evenings, and I've also got a day off before we head out on the first show. So there'll be some more content. So thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so for today's video, I thought it would be a little bit of fun to take a look at my live setup. Now, some people have asked questions about this in the past. Before I got my live room finished and I was filming videos in the control room, I had my rack lives in there. I use it for recording, and we'll talk about it in more detail soon. But a few people had sort of gone, what is that? And can we hear it? And I post quite a lot of stuff on my Instagram and my Facebook, and a few people have shown an interest in it. Now, I know there's going to be some of you that are looking at this and going, why have you got that? What's the point of that? You could do all of that with a tiny little setup. And yeah, you probably could. Or I don't actually believe I could. It would feel the same to me, but I'm not going to go down the whole what's best modelling or amps, route. I love modelling. I love amps. I just love gear. And to be honest with you, this is my thing. I just love it. So I'm fortunate that I play tours where there's a reasonable sized budget, and they're pretty big gigs, they're pretty big arena shows, and we have a really fantastic crew. So, if any of you obviously point out to me, that's big, that's heavy, but it doesn't fit in your car. No, it doesn't. It is specifically a touring setup, and it's come from a combination of kind of trial and error, really. And this sort of does everything that I want it to do, and also from the point of view of the crew that I work with, they love it. It sits down the side of the stage in the tech area. I have my board up on the stage, which is purely a controller board, so I've got no kind of pedals or anything on stage. It's all controllers, amps out the way, and it's completely silent. Now, I grew up in the 70s, and so when I was really getting into guitar in the late 70s, I was very, very young then, by the way, but in the 80s especially, I really got into rigs, and I can remember going to see Marillion in like 1985. I would have been in my sort of early teens, and seeing Stephen Rothery with this massive rig. And all of his pedals were on a tray. And I was like, why is these pedals on a tray? Why don't you have these pedals on the floor? And obviously this was one of those early Boss switching systems. I don't know, some of you may have seen those. They did it wasn't like a keyboard for a computer, and you could program them, the loops, basically. It was an early sort of loop switching setup. And from that point on, I became really fascinated with guitar setups and rigs, and buying Guitar World in the 80s, seeing Steve Vai's Skyscraper rig, and then into the 90s, seeing Jerry Cantrell's rig and Petrucci's rig, and obviously Gilmour's rig and Ty Table's rig. I was just like, I want one of those. So this setup sort of came about because of my love of rigs. It's completely silent. It's utterly bomb-proof in the way that it's been designed. I didn't build it. It was built for me. And we will talk about the construction of the rack a little bit later on. So for those of you that are going to point out to me, why do you use that? What's the point? You could use this, you could use that. I'm not one of those people who tells people what gear they should use. If you use a practice amp and a metal zone, if that's your thing, that's fantastic. I'm never one of those people who goes on posts and, what are you using that for? You shouldn't be using that. You should use whatever makes you happy. And playing guitar is the thing that makes you happy. And we're kind of in a stage now where I see more and more people, again, this is not a disrespectful comment. If people are into using computers for their guitar sounds, that's great. But I think there's a whole generation of players that have missed out plugging into one of these, an amplifier. So I'm, I guess, kind of old school. Yeah, I have a rack, I have an amp, but I'm utilising impulse responses. I'm using the 2-notes gear. A lot of the rack gear, well, actually the 3 processors of my rack are actually going to be removed very soon, and I've got Helix going into there. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, really, this setup. So before we get into talking about the rack, quite a few people have asked for the signal flow, how it's working, what's going on. I wanted to kind of address every single element of my setup. So first of all, let's talk about the guitar. Now, this guitar here, for those of you that have followed me for a while, pretty much my entire professional career, I've played Music Man guitars. I've been very fortunate. I signed a contract with Music Man in 1997. It was the weirdest experience for me to have a guitar company such as Music Man offer me an endorsement deal with a contract that I signed, and I still have it. Now, I gravitated towards the Axis guitar for obvious reasons, because of this was originally the Eddie Van Halen guitar. I own one of those guitars, the red Eddie Van Halen Music Man that I play in quite a lot of my videos. But I really gravitated towards the Axis Sports and then the Super Sports because of I love the vintage trem. I love the switching option. Now, early on in my Music Man involvement career, if you like, I had an Axis Sport that had a scratch plate on it and 3 single coils, and it was very much like my old telly. It was kind of the best of both worlds, and I'd seen pictures of Eddie Van Halen with single coil guitars and kind of thought that was pretty cool with his sort of the shape of this guitar with single coils, and I loved that guitar. Unfortunately, the artist relations guy at the UK Music Man distributor, when I still lived in England, said, we need that guitar back, after like 3 years of me gigging it profusely. And I was absolutely gutted that I gave it back, to the point of where my contact in America was like, why did you give it back? It's an old guitar that we haven't made for years, and we would have credited them. So for years and years, I kept on at Music Man, can I have a single coil Axis? And they said, we'll do anything under the hood for you, but the agreement that we have is you're making guitar DVDs, you play guitars that are available. We don't want you playing custom guitars that people cannot buy. And obviously that was the agreement. So anyway, 4 years ago was my 20th year with Music Man, next year being my 25th year. And for my 20th year, I spoke to Strings and Things. A lot of the contacts now, the guys I work with, have actually retired. But I spoke to my friend Mark Snelling, who's now retired, but was still there at the time, and said, Mark, do you realise that next year is my 20th anniversary? He was like, oh my God, that's a pretty cool achievement. So he reached out to Music Man and told them, and the next thing I knew, I had an email from Brian congratulating me and saying we're really excited and what a great partnership. And, they treat me so incredibly well, considering the size of me compared to other people on their roster. And he said to me, what would you like? We'll build you anything you like as a kind of celebration. So I said, well, can I have my single coil Axis, please? So they agreed. Now, the thing that really freaked me out about this guitar was the fact that Dudley Gimple built this guitar. I've known Dudley for a long time, but Dudley designed this body for Eddie Van Halen. Eddie wanted a Tele meets Les Paul style guitar. I've actually got a video coming up all about the Axis because I have some incredible information regarding the design of that guitar, which has been so ill-reported on other kind of websites and forums and such. There's some real cool info. But anyway, Dudley designed this guitar, and it was designed specifically for Eddie. It wasn't a pre-existing guitar, and that is absolute fact. So when they said to me that I could have my own version of that guitar, it was, first of all, really weird because it was designed for Eddie Van Halen. And then it was even weirder, the fact that Dudley built it and worked with me in the design. So this is, obviously, it's an Axis Super Sport. It's a different wood to normal. Instead of being basswood, it's a mahogany body. I wanted to have the maple cap on it, but I also wanted it to be a fairly kind of neutral colour. Being a man in black and playing concerts where you're a sideman, basically, I thought having something black and a bit classy sort of fitted in more than having, some kind of exquisitely garish sort of colour. I've got my green Axis Tribute, which, although looks great, I think that this looks a little bit more subtle and it looks a little bit classier. So this is a mahogany body, and we have the maple top. Pickup-wise, I wanted to go back to a hot rail. Now, my old Telecaster that I played prior to me using Music Man guitars had a hot rail in it, and then my black Silhouette that I used when I played with the Australian Pink Floyd show, that was a custom build, actually. I think Dudley built that. But that also had the same hot rail in it as my Tele. So when we were speccing out the pickups for this guitar, I said, I'd like that pickup. And Steve Blucher at Damasio advised me to go for a slightly different pickup that had a little bit more low end to it. So we actually settled on the Satch Track, which should be a neck pickup, but it works great in the bridge. So instead of being the Fast Track that I normally use, we got the Satch Track. So it's a little bit hotter. It's got a little bit more low end thud to it. And then I have the injectors in the middle. These are the Damasio injectors. We have a roasted maple neck, locking machine heads, and stainless steel frets. Now, the interesting thing about this guitar is the wiring. It's a little bit unique. First of all, it's got a buffered input, so it needs to take a battery. It's got the same preamp in it as the Majesty, the John Petrucci guitar, and also, I believe, the Luke 3. The volume and the tone pots actually have some push things, shenanigans going on with them. We've got a 5-way switch, and then down here, we've also got a switch for the Piezo. You can see that I've got two outputs going to two wireless transmitters for magnetic or piezo. So let's just have a listen to the pickups. Here's the bridge hot rail. We can split that and bring in the middle single coil. Then we have the middle single coil on its own. Then we have the neck and middle. And then we have the neck single coil. So it's a really nice range of tones straight away. Now, the other cool thing that this guitar does is if I push the volume pot down, it has a clean boost. I use boosters a lot with my amp. I prefer boosters to drive pedals, if I'm honest. So here's my kind of overdrive sound. Push down the volume. Now, you can actually have that a lot hotter, but I've just got a mild boost on it just to give me a little bit more drive. Now, the other really cool thing as well, being such a Brian May fan, Ty Tabor fan, Dave Gilmour fan, I wanted to be able to introduce this neck single coil. So if I'm in the bridge position here, that's the hot rail. If I push down the tone pot, then I've got that pickup, so I have those. So it's kind of, I kind of like that option. And the other cool thing as well is that if I bring in the 5-way switch onto the next setting, so I've got those, I've actually got all 3 pickups now. You know, winding off the tone pot as well, you can create some really cool sounds. So that's the electronics of it. It's kind of unique. Well, it's not really unique. It just has a few things on it that I really wanted to have, and just kind of keeping the controls quite minimal. Now, on the other Super Sports, normally you'd have another volume pot here for the Piezo, but I never use that because I always had my Piezo on a volume pedal. So if we push the switch over, push down the other volume. I have an acoustic guitar. I am cheating a little bit. I am feeding my my Piezo into another 2-notes unit where I have an acoustic impulse response. But even so, the Piezo sound is great, but just using the IR on the Piezo just really kind of brings it. Really brings it to life. Now, another thing that's really cool, if I put that switch in the middle, I get both magnetic and Piezo together. So being such a Thai table fan, I can get my... bring in the acoustic pickup. So I get acoustic and electric guitar simultaneously. Now, moving on to the amp. Now, the amp that I'm using and that I've used since 2016 is the MESA Boogie JP-2C. And I started working with MESA Boogie back in 2016. It was just prior to me going out on tour. It was quite a big show that I was doing called Damerung with. It had a lot of very well-known musicians in it and rock stars in it, Slash and Grace Jones and all manner of people. Lemmy was in it. There was lots and lots of people in it, and it was like this big movie that played. And I was in the band that played the soundtrack, but we went out and did some summer festivals, and Henry Rollins, who wrote the movie, Henry Rollins from Rollins Band and Black Flag, I was a massive Rollins fan in the 90s. He came out on tour with us, so it was pretty cool to be doing these big rock festivals with such an iconic artist. And when my friends at Westside Distribution found out at the time they were still distributing Boogie, they were like, how would you feel about playing boogies on this tour you're doing? And because they asked me, what are you using? I said, well, I don't know. I was just going to take some amps out of storage and see what I've got. And so we spoke and started talking to Boogie in America, and that was it. And I used a Mark V on that tour while this amp was being built. And then subsequently, I started doing a lot of video work for Boogie, and they're just a great bunch of guys to work with. So I've got several other Boogies. A lot of my favourite guitar tones have been produced with MESA amplifiers, especially Dogman with the rectifier, and I use a Badlander rectifier a lot, and I use a Mini Rec. But I really gravitated towards the sound of the Mark series. Obviously, you get that classic Metallica sound, and also those the John Petrucci's tone is absolutely exquisite. The reason why I like this amp, it's got 3 channels, clean. I use that as a crunch channel, which is a kind of low crunch. I've got the crunch backed off quite a lot because I kick in pedals. And then I have my lead channel. The thing to remember about the way that a Mark series works is that this EQ here is actually pre-gain. So you are kind of shaping the sound into the gain stage. And then the graphic EQ is post. Now, this is a very, very powerful EQ stage. And I have this basically on, I have that EQ on my rhythm sound, and this one's slightly different, not quite as much low end on my lead tone. And then my clean channel, I'm just really using the EQ. Although it's not a distort, it's a clean tone, but if you push the gain and push the mid, you start to get that old school sort of clip sound, which I really like. It's fully programmable, really easy. You set the controls aren't programmable, but the kind of settings of what channel has what graphic, and there's a mode called shred mode. I'll show you that in a moment. Basically what shred mode does, it increases the gain and it also tightens up the low end. It's a bit like if you put a tube screamer in front of your amp and pull down the gain and push up the level, it tightens up the low end. You'll also notice that I don't have any low end here on the EQ on the channel, because the more you push it up on the distortion, it can get a little bit flubby. So having that pulled out keeps it really tight. But there's a reverb on it as well. And all of the kind of additional things, you can actually program them, set the amp as you want it, and then press store. So I use the MIDI functionality of the amp in conjunction with the switches in the rack, and also with Captor X, 2 Notes Captor X, which I've got running. And also this amp really kind of influenced the way that the rack runs and how I run the rack now. So let's have a listen to each of the channels. Here's the clean channel. I can switch in some effects. Okay, so this is channel 2 now. This is my rhythm sound. So reasonably low drive, actually. I kind of like it to be have the ability of pushing it a little bit more, either with the boost on the guitar, or with a drive pedal such as the EP booster. So I run it sort of relatively low-ish gain, and also that means that I can sort of clean the sound up when I'm using single coils. So you get those nice sort of in-between tones. Okay, now on to channel 3. You can see how I'm switching with my master board here that controls the rack, how it's seamlessly switching the channels on the amp as well. That's my lead sound, so you can hear that there's a little bit of a volume push as well. So I've gone on to another bank now on my board, and you can see that we got the little light engaged now, which is the shred mode. So that will sound a lot tighter. You know, if I kick in, say, the EP booster, so I get a little bit more gain. You can hear start to get that kind of chugging sort of sound out of it. And then I've got another lead sound here, which also has the shred mode engaged. So I tend to use sort of a medium crunch rhythm sound that I can push harder with pedals, and a nice lead tone, and then I have a kind of tighter rhythm sound and also a slightly tighter, more gainy lead tone as well. And all of that is being done with the JP. Like I said, I might put the EP booster in front of it just to push it a bit more, but you know, on the lead sounds, it's all just the JP. As I said, it's fully MIDI switchable as well, so it integrates really, really well with the rack.